Hey there, besties. Welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to continue the recap of the manhwa Lucia. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy the video because it really helps our channel grow. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started.
You're really amazing, Lucia. I can't believe you're already so good at riding. When did you improve so much? Kate exclaimed. When the women-only equestrian center opens tomorrow, you're going to be flying around on your horse. Goodness, Kate, Lucia said, laughing. I'm being serious. I don't remember how I even managed to mount a horse in the beginning, or maybe I don't want to remember, Kate said, rubbing her forehead sadly. But I'm sure you were great at it, Lucia reassured her. You overestimate me, Lucia, Kate replied. Then again, I do think I've improved compared to a few years ago, she added softly. That's probably thanks to this guy, Lucia said, referring to her horse. What a gentle horse. It follows my clumsy orders so well, she said, patting the horse, which snorted happily. Then again, you have a really nice horse, Kate told her. Do you have an eye for horses, Kate? Lucia asked suddenly. No, it's nothing like that. Anyone could look at him and tell that he is a handsome horse with glossy hair, Kate said, laughing awkwardly. It really suits you, Lucia, Kate tells her. Oh my, thank you, Kate, Lucia replied, smiling as she patted her horse. It's the horse that Duke Taran chose for her. Of course. It's a good horse, Kate thought. Lucia seems to be happy, she chuckled inwardly. But it's rather odd. The world's first, never-before-seen equestrian center just happens to open right around the time when Lucia started learning horse riding. Could it be? She wondered as Lucia talked to a butler. I'll be in your care, Lucia told him. Yes, madam, he replied with a bow. Kate? Lucia called, causing her to jolt back from her thoughts. Oh, yes? Kate responded in shock. You'll have lunch with us, right? Lucia invited her. Maybe I'm overthinking it, Kate thought inwardly. I'm super excited for the food, she told Lucia, smiling sheepishly. Later that night, Lucia rested on the Duke. Hugh, I heard there's an incredibly large lake to the east of Rome, she told him. It is big. Do you want to see it? He asked her. Shall I set aside some time to take her there? Duke Hugo wondered. I heard that it's boating season, Lucia said, rising up. And apparently, a lot of nobles own small boats. Do you have one? She asked excitedly. No, he replied. Lucia didn't know that Duke Hugo had never gone out on a boat before. He didn't even remember hearing of such a social activity. He considered it something that people with nothing else to do would enjoy. He glanced at Lucia, observing her pretty face. I should buy a boat, he reasoned. Then may I accept Lady Kate's invitation? She asked him, making him look puzzled. So this has to do with the daughter of Count Milton again, he thought. That would be dangerous, he told her coldly. She said there haven't been any boating accidents before, and Lady Kate assured me that House Milton's boats are extremely safe and durable, she told him, her eyes sparkling. This caused him to go silent. When are you planning on going? He asked her. In 4 days, she said with a smile. The next day, at the Miltons' castle, Kate was called by her father. Did you call for me, father? Kate asked Count Milton. Yes, Kate. We received a letter from the palace. I think you should take a look at it, he said, looking a bit nervous as he handed her the letter. Me? She asked, taking the letter to read. What is this about? She wondered. In an instant, she understood its content, which puzzled her. A cultural inspection? What does that even mean? She asked her father. Who knows? Not even I am aware of His Majesty's intentions, Count Milton replied. I believe the conclusion is that he wants to control both activities on the lake. It won't be much different from before, however. There will be a designated day when the path to the lake will be regulated so that only women will be permitted to enter, he said, almost laughing. Personally, I think it's a good idea, he told her. Any parent with a daughter would agree, Count Milton remarked. When did you say you were going boating again? He asked his daughter. In 4 days, Kate replied, still in awe. The regulation will begin in 4 days as well. It shouldn't cause any trouble for you while you are there, but I'm letting you know just in case, he said, his mood lightening up. Could it be that you were planning on spending time with men? He added in a terrifying manner. No, she exclaimed, stunned by her father's words. Outside, Kate closed the door behind her. What is this? I'm supposed to go boating with Lucia in 4 days. This can't be mere coincidence, she thought, stepping away from the door slowly. Could it be?
No.
But could it actually be? Is Lucia actually confined to her house? She wondered, almost screaming internally. She pictured Lucia's smile. No, that wasn't the expression of someone who was being confined. I didn't sense any feeling of concern from her, Kate said, stepping away from the door even more. She was stunned for a moment. This is turning out to be rather interesting. So, that's how it is, Kate thought, a smirk forming on her face as she hatched a plan. Lucia, did you know? Kate told her excitedly. Hugh, Lucia said, informing Duke Hugo about Kate's latest news. Lady Kate again? The Duke thought. From then on, Kate began telling Lucia what she wanted, and in turn, Lucia would tell the Duke over and over again, startling him each time. Did you hear? Kate would ask. Hugh, Lady Kate told me that, Lucia would say. Again, Duke Hugo thought, feeling a bit exasperated. Lucia, Kate said, her eyes glowing with excitement. Hugh, Lucia would call out, relating Kate's news to him, causing him to flinch silently each time. Hugh, Lady Kate came by today, Lucia told him one day, causing the Duke to twitch a bit. There's a recreational activity called a fox hunt. People regularly gather their foxes and make them hunt. I don't have a fox, but I want to go and watch, Lucia said with a smile. You might run into a dangerous wild animal in the forest, he told her with a stern look. There's a small forest not far from the lake. She said there aren't any dangerous animals over there, Lucia explained. The largest predator there is the fox. I can guess the place she's talking about. It must be that little forest, Duke Hugo thought. It's small enough to gather and control the entire perimeter, but I need to check if it will still be safe with only women present, he pondered over Lucia's words. Can I go? She asked, her eyes glowing. Duke Hugo looked at her, his demeanor a bit sad. Go ahead, he told her, making her beam with joy. Thank you, she said, rushing to hug him with a leap. Duke Hugo squeezed her in his arms. Again, it's that woman, he thought. That wretched Lady Kate Milton. He screamed inwardly. Whenever I turned my head, my wife looked back at me from her spot. It was a kind of comfort that I had never even thought about, Duke Hugo thought, watching his wife smile while they lay side by side. Why must you go to congratulate her on her birthday? Duke Hugo asked her. Rather than having to congratulate her, it's more like I want to go visit my friend, Lucia told him, her eyes sparkling with innocence. She's at it again. This is how she gets her way, he thought as he watched her blushed face. But a birthday party seems mild in comparison to the other events she's asked to go to, Duke Hugo considered. You may go, he told her with a sigh. By the way, she's going to have a pajama party after the banquet. May I have permission to spend the night? Lucia asked, staring at him as he watched her, puzzled. Again, it's that darn Kate Milton. Of course, I should have known that there was no way it would be so simple, he thought inwardly, almost furious. You're a married woman, but you still want to sleep in someone else's home, he said, their eyes meeting. Oh, yes, I suppose you are right. I'll come back after the main party, Lucia replied, dropping into sadness, making Duke Hugo flinch at her sudden change in mood. As always, she backed down without asking a second time. Vivian has never asked for a present, and she's also never defended or badmouthed anyone. But the fact that she doesn't do those things troubles me even more. I'd feel better if she could just ask me for jewels, ask me for presents. She won't even wear the necklace I gave her because she thinks it's too precious, he thought, watching Lucia's sad reaction. I'll send the carriage, so return in the morning, he said, finally giving in to Lucia's request. Lucia's eyes lit up as she beamed with joy. I will. You're really giving me permission, right? She asked him, leaning forward. Are you that happy to leave your husband alone in bed? Duke Hugo said casually. But it's only for a day, she told him, gasping. When you go to inspect the domain, you're always gone for several days at a time, she said to him. That's different because it's my job, he told her. Why do you get to make exceptions? Lucia asked, pouting. He chuckled. Duke Hugo leaned forward, trying to catch a kiss. It's nice that you're spending time with Count Milton's daughter, he told her before kissing her. Moans escaped her lips. Duke Hugo grabbed her, turning her to face him as he cuddled her. But don't learn strange things, he told her with a faint smile. What do you mean by strange? She asked, unaware of his intentions. Oh, Hugh, she said innocently, but he shushed her. You're doing great, just do as you always do, he told her before sliding into her from behind. Lucia moaned with immense pleasure. Hugh, she said softly as his rhythmic movement caught her unaware. Stay where you've always been, stay only where I can see you, he said softly as he increased his pace, making her scream loudly as she approached her limit. Later that night, Lucia slept soundly like a baby as the Duke watched her softly. Just a few weeks ago, she was tossing and turning in her sleep because she was hot, but now she's sound asleep, he thought, cuddling her with a smile. Suddenly, I realized that summer was already almost over. I always thought that the passage of time was so very slow, he thought as he brushed his hand against her hair. I'm not sure when it started, but time began to pass by faster, he thought, leaning closer to her face as he squeezed her lightly, cuddling Lucia as he drifted to sleep. The next morning, in the garden, Lucia wondered about touching the flowers. Duke Hugo stood from his office balcony, observing her move around. He chuckled at the sight of her. Master, there's something I'd like to speak with you about regarding the madam, Jerome said, entering the passage, startling Duke Hugo. Jerome stepped into the Duke's office, holding a cup of tea. He observed the office, noticing piles of work left unattended to by Duke Hugo. The master, he muttered, glancing out the window. He saw him standing on the balcony as usual. Beneath the balcony was the garden that Lady Vivian had been diligently managing. She visits the garden frequently, taking care of the flowers as she walked through, while the master watched her. He never used to get distracted from his work during the day. I guess life is full of surprises, Jerome thought inwardly, smiling sheepishly. People say that it's possible for someone who was once promiscuous to become a different, more honest version of themselves after getting married, but who would have thought that the master would be one of those cases, he said, leaning forward to place the cup of tea on the desk. At first, I thought the master's interest in his marriage would be a short-lived amusement, but now I know that's not true, Jerome thought as he watched Duke Hugo outside on the balcony observing Lucia. I wonder if the master realizes it himself. When he's with Lady Vivian, his eyes always follow her, as if he can't see anything else. It's rather surprising that the madam isn't conscious of his watchful gaze when it is so obvious that even a bystander would feel uncomfortable standing near them, he thought. The madam can be quite slow to catch on to such things, he said, dropping the cup of tea quietly. He went mute for a while, pondering over something. Their relationship is somewhat peculiar. They are definitely close. The madam smiles innocently at my master, and his typically cold facade melts when he gazes at her, Jerome remarked inwardly. Yet, there is some kind of thin, invisible wall separating them. It's become part of my daily routine to deliver a summary of what the madam has been doing. I am also expected to report where she was and who she was with. That's why I can't postpone this report any longer, even more so because it concerns her health, Jerome thought, standing up from leaning against the Duke's desk and walking towards the balcony. Would it be better for me to force the madam to come here and tell him herself? I've pondered it many times, he continued. The madam promised that she would personally tell the master, but she's been silent on the matter since then. I feel very apologetic to the madam, but it is a steward's duty to ensure that the people he serves are in good health. Your Excellency, there's something I'd like to speak with you about, regarding the madam, Jerome said upon entering the balcony, stealing his master's attention. What is it? Duke Hugo asked with a stern look. Jerome went quiet for a moment, his facial expression turning sad. What could be so difficult to talk about? Tell me, the Duke demanded. Jerome still remained quiet, fixing his gaze to the ground. She hasn't been menstruating for a while, he finally said, causing the Duke's eyes to widen. At first, a maid thought she might have gotten pregnant, Jerome told the Duke. She was examined, but it wasn't due to pregnancy. According to the madam herself, she has never menstruated, and she refused to be further examined by a doctor regarding her symptoms, he said, his eyes closed as he looked tense. Is it a serious issue that she's not menstruating even though she's not pregnant? The Duke asked, his expression reflecting concern. It is definitely not an ordinary situation. Perhaps she cannot get pregnant at all, but that could also be an indication of some other illness. I would suggest that she gets a closer examination to be sure, Jerome said almost immediately. But she told me that you were aware of her condition and that there was nothing to worry about, he told Duke Hugo softly. She said that I was already aware? The Duke questioned Jerome. How, he said. Suddenly, he remembered Lucia mentioning she couldn't get pregnant with a child. Instantly, he flinched, looking stunned. She definitely said that before. She told me that she was unable to get pregnant, as if it meant nothing to her, and I laughed off her words in passing, Duke Hugo thought, reminiscing of their first encounter before their marriage. Sweat trickled down the Duke's face. Ha, he exclaimed. The matter of her pregnancy was never an issue at all because it was impossible for her to carry my child. The way she said it made it seem like she was revealing an incredible secret, but back then, I thought it was amusing, Duke Hugo thought, his eyes widening as he reflected upon Lucia's words. That's right, I have known about it, he said, looking terrified. His mood took a turn as he fell into sadness almost instantly. My head feels numb, as though I'd taken a blow from behind. An unpleasant feeling started to crawl up from beneath my stomach, Duke Hugo realized, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of the revelation. He didn't know the reason, and he couldn't explain it. He didn't even know what the object of his rage was. What is the doctor doing? He asked Jerome almost immediately. It's not the kind of illness that shows external symptoms. The doctors cannot diagnose her until she explains her symptoms to him, Jerome told him. Call the doctor now, he demanded, perplexing the steward. Duke Hugo went silent for a while, his mind racing. Jerome, still looking tense, said nothing. Before saying yes, Your Excellency, Jerome said with a bow before leaving his master's sight to fetch the doctor as requested. Duke Hugo was now alone again. He rested his hand on the balcony railings as his stomach hurt him. Fixing his gaze to the floor, Duke Hugo clenched his fist in anger. Damn it, he mumbled angrily. She was the ideal wife that I had always wanted. She never bothered me or asked for anything, and she never had a single complaint, Duke Hugo thought, his hand against his face as he pondered over his wife. That's not normal, he exclaimed inwardly. The only things I know about my wife is from the few pages of the report that Fabian works, he thought, remembering Fabian's reports concerning Lucia. I realized that I have no idea what kind of thoughts she has. We got along well. At least, that's what I thought. Our conversations were enjoyable, and our bedroom was always full of passion, he thought, reminiscing about their intimate moments. But, have we ever had a proper discussion? Has she ever shown me what was deep inside of her heart? Duke Hugo pondered over. Just because she smiled at me so brightly, I'd thought that she had fully opened up to me, he flinched a bit. Jerome, he called out. Yes, Your Excellency, Jerome replied, responding to Duke Hugo's call. Give me a list of all of Vivian's expenses up until now, Duke Hugo ordered, his eyes looking serious. Jerome soon provided him with the documents he requested. Is this everything? Duke Hugo asked, unable to believe how small the documents were. Yes, Your Excellency, Jerome replied calmly, his hands behind his back. It's been several months since we got married, but she's only spent this much, Duke Hugo thought, his hand over the documents. What about the doctor? He questioned Jerome. I have sent someone, Jerome told him. I'll be there for the examination, he informed Jerome, who bowed saying, Yes, Your Excellency. Duke Hugo grabbed hold of one piece of paper, flapping it in the process as he scanned through the paper with a stern look. Finally, Duke Hugo crumpled the paper furiously. On those documents, the only things listed were expenses related to the garden and a few tea parties that she had hosted. I don't see any personal spending, Duke Hugo thought as he sank deeper into his seat, repeatedly glancing over Lucia's expenses. She's never called for a dressmaker or a jeweler, not even once? He asked Jerome, to which he replied, she hasn't. But I'm sure she's going to attend several tea parties. She has dresses that were once worn by previous duchesses, as well as the jewels passed down through the Taran family. She always selects one of those old dresses to be altered, and she returns the jewelry to the safe after she has finished borrowing them, Jerome told Duke Hugo, his eyes still fixated on the paper. Duke Hugo looked at the paper silently. Why does this make me so angry? I'm angry, but I can't explain why I'm angry, he thought, crumpling the paper some more. Isn't this what I wanted? That's right. This is the marriage that I wanted. I wanted a wife who would stay in her place, like a doll. I needed to be married, and that's why I had to marry someone. But the duties of a husband were tiresome, that's why I agreed to our deal. It was a contract. A contract that was intended to satisfy the needs of both parties, Duke Hugo reflected. She said that she needed the title of Duchess, and I was sure that she sought all of the wealth and power that actually comes along with being a Duchess. It hasn't been very long since we wed, but I think I understand now. She was never interested in those things to begin with. Why is this so unpleasant? Why is it a problem that she doesn't want power or wealth? I have nothing to lose, Duke Hugo thought inwardly, groaning gently as he felt his anger rise. I should be pleased with this contract that is overwhelmingly in my favor. I should be. Then why do I feel so wretched? Duke Hugo thought, his hand against his head. It feels as though the ground that was once supporting me has begun to crumble at my feet. I feel desperate and anxious. Why am I uneasy? He pondered, lost in thought. Your Excellency, Jerome said, bringing the Duke back to reality as he jolted back. The doctor is waiting, Jerome informed him, a maid behind him bowing. Outside in the garden, Lucia paused for a moment. Oh, she said softly, looking up to the balcony and seeing no one there. He's not there, she murmured to herself, a hint of sadness in her voice. I was sure that she was standing there just a moment ago, Lucia thought, still observing the balcony, hoping that he would come back. It was by chance that I first saw him on the balcony, she said, her mind flashing back to how she ended up in the garden. Duke Hugo stood at his balcony, watching outside? Oh, Lucia exclaimed softly as she passed through a window, catching a glimpse of the Duke. It's Hugh. Is that his office? Is he taking a break? I didn't know I could see his balcony from here. She thought, watching him quietly for a bit. He's so far that I can't see him well. He's very busy, so I'm usually only able to see him during dinner. We live in the same space, yet he's always in a place that's far from me, she thought, reaching out to the window. Jerome said he's usually buried in papers for work, she remembered. Meetings and inspecting the land, he's such a diligent and hard-working lord. Unlike a certain someone from my dreams, Lucia said, looking flushed, smiling sheepishly. I ended up thinking about that man again. I want to erase Count Metten from my mind, Lucia thought, holding her head in frustration. In this life, I don't even want the hem of my dress to brush against him, she said inwardly, letting go of her head. Forget him already, she told herself. I found a new path for myself, so that I can prevent my life from becoming a living nightmare. Now that I think about it, below Hugh's balcony is the garden. Now I'm really glad I tidied it up, she thought, observing the garden. Is he looking at the garden? Then again, I'm sure he needs to take breaks from working, she thought, closing her mouth in amazement, her face turning red. I have a brilliant idea, Lucia exclaimed. She soon appeared in the garden looking delighted. Taking care of the garden is an excellent excuse. These ones are budding, she exclaimed, delightedly watching a flower. Anyone would think that I'm just looking at the flowers. I'm sure he'll think the same, she said inwardly, glancing sideways towards Duke Hugo's direction. It's him, she said, jolting as she saw him on the balcony, her heart beating faster. He's still on the balcony. What do I do? She said to herself, turning red. Just knowing that he's watching from the balcony is making me so happy. But I'm sure Hugh's simply looking at the garden and not at me. Why does the back of my head feel so ticklish? she questioned inwardly, turning even redder. Inwardly, Lucia wanted to look at him. But what if people realize that I only came out here to see him? I even came up with a great excuse. Still, there would be no point to coming out here. Oh, what if I turn around without looking directly at him? I'll only take a small peek so that it isn't obvious, Lucia said, feeling delighted at her plan. She kept silent, looking down away from the balcony for a while. I really want to see him, she thought, still backing away from the balcony. Gathering courage, she finally decided, here goes nothing, before turning around. To her disappointment, she found no one standing on the balcony. Lucia stood still, observing the balcony. He's not there, she said inwardly, her facial expression turning sad. He's a busy person, so I know he can't just look out at the garden all day long. Because of my intense urge to see him, I would always turn around to look at him whenever he wasn't there. I would feel a large void in my heart. Lucia continued to fix her eyes on the balcony, her gaze quiet and contemplative. Abruptly, she turned, her mood souring. He was faithful to the role of a husband. We ate dinner together almost every day, and we would talk. He would come to my bedroom every night. It was all beyond my expectations, she thought, reminiscing upon their moments together. I know that I'm selfish for wanting more than this, Lucia thought, holding her face in her hands. I know that. But, sometimes I can't stand how empty I feel, she admitted to herself. Madam, a handmaiden called, stepping closer to Lucia. She turned slowly in her direction. He asked me to bring you to him, the handmaiden said, bowing. Who? Lucia asked, clutching onto herself, though she already had a strong suspicion. There is only one person in Rome, she thought, knowing who sent for her as she watched the maid with a keen look. Well, His Excellency, the maid said, confirming Lucia's suspicions. What in the world is going on? Lucia thought in shock as she saw Duke Hugo, Jerome, and Dr. Anna seated in the parlor waiting for her. Jerome must have told him. I knew I'd have to tell him one day, but I didn't think it'd be in a setting like this with a doctor, she thought, standing frozen at the entrance. Why does this situation make me so uncomfortable? On the other hand, I know that I will be disappointed if he showed no interest. Not even I know what I truly want, she thought, feeling conflicted. Vivian, Duke Hugo said, getting up from his seat as he headed towards her direction. Why aren't you coming in? He asked her, his voice sounding firm, causing Lucia to flinch. He looked at her with a perplexed look. Why? He asked her. Lucia went mute, clinging to herself, her gaze fixed away from him. There's a clear distance between us, Duke Hugo thought. He reached out his hand, offering to hold hers as she watched him, looking unsure. Lucia fixed her gaze at the Duke's hand, not uttering a word. She reached out her own hand, gently touching his. Duke Hugo watched her quietly, then suddenly grabbed her hand firmly, causing her to exclaim "Ah!" He turned abruptly, dragging her as he led her into the room, away from the entrance where she had remained since she arrived. He stepped in, leading her to his chair, while Jerome and Dr. Anna watched in silence. Dr. Anna observed them, her gaze fixed at them. The couple sat down silently, without uttering a sound. No wonder she's exhausted. He's been forcing himself on her with that large build of his, Anna thought, watching them closely. I heard you haven't been menstruating, my lady, Anna asked Lucia. Lucia was quiet before confirming that's correct. Have you ever menstruated before? She inquired. I have, Lucia told her. Then why did it stop? Were you hurt or did you suffer from an illness? Did you ingest anything that you shouldn't have? The doctor asked, seeking more answers from her. Lucia kept mute, her face turning red as she tried to avoid Anna's gaze. What? She's treating this as if I have a serious illness, Lucia thought to herself. In case I wasn't able to avoid marrying Count Metten in the future, I made a choice to be prepared in advance. And I've always been confident that I can cure myself whenever I want to, with the treatment that Philip told me about in my dreams, Lucia thought inwardly. Explain everything to the doctor, Duke Hugo said suddenly, causing her to flinch. She looked at him, her face tensed. Duke Hugo's gaze pierced her eyes deeply. His eyes are so cold, she thought, quickly turning away from him. I consumed a harmful herb after my first menstruation, Lucia told Anna. Were you poisoned? The doctor asked. I was not poisoned, Lucia replied coldly. Why did you consume that herb? How much of it did you eat? Do you remember the color or shape of the herb? Or, perhaps you remember the name? Anna inquired, her gaze fixed on Lucia as she looked at the floor. Lucia knew she had eaten 3-leaf mugwort. I don't know. I was a child back then, and I barely remember anything about it, Lucia told Anna, denying any knowledge of the herb. Dr. Anna wrote in her book, visibly tense. In Lucia's dream, she had sought out many doctors, but none of them could even diagnose her properly, let alone cure her. Even if I told her all of my symptoms, I'm sure Anna still wouldn't know. But still, I want to hide my symptoms for as long as I can, she thought. Everyone, leave, Duke Hugo announced, commanding everyone to exit the room. Lucia jolted, her face filled with confusion as she looked at him. You will stay here and talk with me, he said, his gaze fixed on Lucia. Lucia gasped softly, looking quiet. All right, Anna said as she and Jerome left the room, gently locking the door behind them. Now alone in the parlor, the couple sat down, a brief silence enveloping the room. Why are you lying? Duke Hugo asked her, breaking the silence. Lucia lifted her head gently, looking at his face. Oh, he's back to his usual self. His voice is gentle, she thought inwardly. I didn't lie, Lucia tells him softly. You're hiding the truth from the doctor. Not telling the truth is the same as a lie, the Duke tells her. How did he know? Can he read minds? Lucia thought, her face tensing as she was taken aback by his words. Your face says you're wondering how I knew, Duke Hugo tells her softly, observing her facial expression. Again? Lucia thought, flinching. Duke Hugo held her hand calmly. You're bad at lying, because it's written all over your face, he tells her, squeezing her arm slightly as he draws her close to himself. Lucia watches him quietly. I must have been a bother. I'm sure you are busy with work, she says suddenly, rising from her seat. I'm sorry for making you concerned, she tells him, backing away. Do you think I'm blaming you for that? Duke Hugo asks her, unsure of her mood. You don't need to worry, she tells him. What? Duke Hugo asks. I'll never get better anyway, Lucia says coldly, causing him to flinch at her words. What do you mean by that? And why would I not worry when you can't be cured? He asks, holding her hand. I told you from the very beginning. I can't bear children. You weren't interested and you didn't ask me why. So why are you suddenly curious now? Lucia asks him, her words cutting into the Duke as she fixes her gaze on his. Am I not allowed to suddenly become curious? He asked, watching her. Lucia was mute, unable to answer him. I am unworthy of your curiosity, she said, turning her gaze away from him. He continued to watch her quietly. Don't say that, he told her softly, still holding her hand. I apologize, Lucia said softly. She sat down with a flop. Vivian, do you want to complain about past events? Duke Hugo asked her calmly. Past events, she thought. So for you, it's something that simply happened in the past. That day at the Capitol, the only thing he asked was if I was able to prove my claim. Since then, he's never asked me if it's true that I can't have a child. Not once did he ask me if there was anything wrong with me. I thought he had forgotten all about it. Yes, that was the extent of your interest in me. How miserable, she thought inwardly, her gaze turning sad. I'm asking because I'm worried about your current condition. You should explain your symptoms to the doctor and get proper treatment, Duke Hugo told her softly, showing concern. Day after day, my heart continues to beat for him. But he'll never know about how I wish that my heart would stiffen so I can't even take another breath, she thought. His gentle touches, his gentle voice, they make me feel even more miserable. I know his kindness doesn't hold any affection, but every brush of his fingertips and every word he says makes my heart feel like a sheep caught in a giant wave. He doesn't have any interest in me. He has no feelings for me. I'd rather he be mean to me. Please, let me hate you, she thought, turning red as he gently touched her face. I don't want treatment, she told him. Why not? He asked, concern evident in his voice. It would be troublesome for you if I were to be cured, Lucia replied. Why would it be troublesome for me? He asked, causing her to flinch, her gaze fixed away from him. You didn't want me to have children, Lucia said, her voice growing harsh and loud. She fell silent, and Duke Hugo, taken aback, watched her. He went mute, his mind drifting back to a past event. No, Lord Philip had shouted before being punched hard by Duke Hugo. Blood splattered everywhere. In the dungeons, Duke Hugo held Lord Philip by the neck, blood staining the doctor's dirty shirt. Hurry up and tell me, Duke Hugo demanded. I cannot do that. It's a family secret, Lord Philip groaned in pain. Duke Hugo hit him hard, kicking him to the floor. Lord Philip slid, screaming in agony. Should I shove you into the dungeon so you never see the light of day again? Tell me before I cut your tongue out, Duke Hugo demanded, his eyes staring with an evil look. Lord Philip lay on the floor, unable to speak clearly. Prior to spending her first night with a man of House Turan, the woman must drink his blood for at least 1 year. A special condition necessary for another woman, who is not a Turan, to continue the bloodline. And that old man was the only one who knew of the condition. After banishing the old man, I searched through all of his belongings but was unable to find any information. If it was documented, he probably stored it in his mind or somewhere nobody would be able to find it. In the end, I beat the old man into submission, Duke Hugo thought inwardly, reminiscing about the doctor's words that day. My wife isn't suitable to meet those conditions, and even if that method wasn't as gruesome as it was, I don't plan to produce any offspring, Duke Hugo thought. It's not that I don't want a child from her. I simply do not want to leave behind a child with my blood. But if I want her to understand all of that, I'll have to explain many things that I have been hiding. I can't let Vivian know about those nightmarish events, he said inwardly, his demeanor turning sad as he watched Lucia gently. I can't tell her, he concluded inwardly. My wording was incorrect. You were never interested in anything at all, Lucia said, finally breaking the silence and wearing a smile. Duke Hugo flinched slightly. The one who isn't interested is, he started, about to reveal his thoughts, but he covered his mouth, stopping himself from saying more. I didn't know that you wanted my attention, he told her, holding his head. Her heart beat faster as she watched him, her eyes wide. No. It's not that I want it, she told him, looking away from his gaze, trying to hide her red face as she felt tense. If he notices my feelings, he might put up a wall like he did with Sophia Lawrence. I don't mind living like this for the rest of my life, she thought inwardly. I'm living a luxurious life. Instead of expressing himself with words, my husband smiles at me tenderly and embraces me passionately. Even if I can't earn his heart, I want to stay by his side and keep watching him, just like this, she thought. I didn't forget about our contract, she said softly. I became greedy for something that I didn't deserve. I don't want to become a woman of his past, she thought inwardly. Right, the contract, he said with a smile, brushing his hair with his hand. Why did I agree to the contract like that? He thought inwardly. I can enjoy a private life of my own, and you can keep your heart close to me. That was in our contract, right? Lucia asked him calmly. Lucia looked away, not uttering a word, looking tense. But do you know? We never talked about what would happen if those conditions were to be violated, Duke Hugo told her, drawing her to himself and startling her as he carried her onto his lap. Are you worried that I won't be able to hold up my promise? Lucia asked, looking worried. Why do you jump to conclusions like that? He asked, his tone harsh. I'm sorry, I must have a twisted mind, Lucia said, turning away from his gaze. She calmed down, and Duke Hugo observed her silently. When I think about it, ever since I first met her, she's never backed down in a conversation. I just didn't realize it until now. Perhaps this is also one of our many sides. To be exact, it's a side of her that she's never shown me before. Despite our current situation, I'm delighted to learn something new about Vivian. I feel like I've taken a peek at her true self that is different from the quiet and smiling countenance that she usually shows me. A little more, I want to know more about you, he thought inwardly. If I give up the freedom in my private life, will you open the locked gate to your heart? He asked, holding her calmly. Lucia's eyes widened in surprise. Pardon? She asked, unsure of his words. What I'm trying to say is, he paused for a moment, feeling a bit tense. Get treatment, he told her softly. I don't want to, Lucia said rudely, turning away from him. Vivian, he called out loudly. I shouldn't have a child anyway, she told him, causing him to be perplexed. So it's fine that I can't get pregnant. But, if I can be cured, will you allow me to have a child? Will you give me your permission? She asked with a smile. I can't have a child. Why are you suddenly curious now? She continued, as if it wasn't a problem. So, I thought it was fine. But of course, it can't be that easy for her. My own carelessness hurt my wife, he thought, watching her with a sad look. It's not possible for me to get her pregnant. So, all I have to say is, it would be fine for you to have a child. If I say that, I'm sure I will be able to see Vivian smile immediately. I could do that. But I don't want to deceive her in such a way, he thought inwardly, letting go of her arm. If I can't tell her the truth, I at least don't want to lie to her, he thought. I don't need any offspring, Duke Hugo said, turning his face away from Lucia. If you're worried about the inheritance, then I can write another contract. I wouldn't even mind if the child has no right to succession, she told him calmly, placing her hands against his chest. Neither of those things are the problem. I don't want to leave any traces of myself behind, Duke Hugo told her, his demeanor sad. But you already have a son. Lucia told him, causing him to flinch. He stuttered before going mute. He's different, he said, holding Lucia's arms tightly. There are a lot of things that I can't explain. The old man is the only one left who knows that Damien isn't my son. Once it begins to overflow, there will be no stopping it. I don't want to share the secret of House Taran with anyone. I don't even plan to tell Damien, Duke Hugo thought inwardly. A long time ago, I made up my mind to take this secret to my grave so that it will be buried with me forever, he thought. I had no idea you wanted a child so badly, he told Lucia softly, their gazes locked. I'm sorry, I'm sure that's not what you wanted from your wife, Lucia said, rising from his lap. Vivian, I wasn't trying to criticize you. I was just surprised to find out something that I didn't know before. When we first talked about marriage, you spoke as though you didn't even care whether or not you had a child, he told her softly, still seated. It's not that it didn't matter. I just know that we'll never be able to conceive a child. In the beginning, I didn't plan to explain any of that to her, because I only needed a marriage engagement, he thought inwardly. But you won't allow me to divorce you, Lucia said, facing him, causing him to be perplexed. Divorce? Duke Hugo said, standing up from his seat in shock. She dares to suggest getting a divorce? He thought with anger. Not even a chance. I told you from the beginning. A divorce is prohibited, he told her, his tone serious. Ah, Lucia exclaimed, looking visibly tensed. I know, House Taran's tradition. I remember them, she said softly. I'm the one who wouldn't be able to handle getting a divorce, she thought inwardly. Vivian, why can't we just stay as we are now? Duke Hugo asked her softly. Lucia went silent, her demeanor turning sad. I know I'm being selfish, but I keep wanting someone to be with when I'm alone, she told him. Why would you ever be alone? He asked, showing concern. You aren't trying to tell me that you'll stay by my side forever, are you? She asked him, wearing a sad smirk. What? Duke Hugo asked, looking puzzled. Lucia observed him calmly. You don't love me, she said loudly, her hand against her chest, looking shocked. You don't care about how I feel. You only think of me as a convenient and obedient wife that you can keep by your side, she thought inwardly. I will never love you, she said. What is there between us? How long did you expect this relationship to last? Lucia blurted out angrily. Inwardly, she wanted to hurt him. I want you to suffer. If I can't leave a scratch in your heart no matter what I do, if you can't have any feelings for me at all, then at the very least, I will cause trouble for you, she thought. Duke Hugo watched her calmly, not uttering a word. Oh, Lucia exclaimed in shock. That thought only lasted for a second. I thought he would give me a cold reply and argue. So, I even went as far as to come up with a bitter response, but for a second his face was full of an indescribable misery. Duke Hugo watched her quietly. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again silently. Ah, she thought, covering her mouth with her hands. I realized how shallow and spiteful my desire to hurt him was. Right, you must already be envisioning the end, Duke Hugo said calmly, watching her reaction. His cold expression and manner of speech were his armor. He wasn't indifferent because he didn't feel anything. Instead of revealing his feelings, he was simply swallowing them down. How pitiful, Lucia thought calmly. It was only for a short moment, but I felt like I had seen his true nature. I wasn't able to get that expression of pain that he wore for a second out of my mind. Oh, I want to reach out to him, she thought as she watched him with a sad look. That's right. From the beginning, there had always been an end, Duke Hugo said, breaking the silence. That must be what you meant when you said you wanted roses, right? He asked her, causing her to clutch her fist unto herself. Lucia went mute shortly. Yes, you're right, she told him softly. I asked him to give me roses because I didn't want to become a fool who obsessed over an ending that didn't exist. I thought that no matter how far gone my mind was, if he declared the end by sending me roses, I would be able to return to normal, she thought. What were you planning to do if you received roses from me? He asked her, causing her heart to beat faster. Lucia watched him, her heart racing gently. She clenched onto her dress. That's, she said tensely. During dinner, Lucia watched her food calmly, her facial expression looking sad. Madam, I'll have another dish prepared right away, Jerome said, drawing her attention. Oh no, it's all right. The food tastes fine. Thank you, Jerome, Lucia told him with a smile. But she barely touched any of it, Jerome thought, watching her food. There was soon silence between them. The master has been very busy with his official duties lately, Jerome said softly, a bit tense. I see. I'm worried that he might not be eating properly. Please see to it that he is eating regularly, Lucia instructed Jerome, to which he replied, yes, madam. I've been eating dinner alone. For a week now. In that entire time, I haven't seen his face once, she thought, eating a piece of her food. He is so busy that he is always working in his office, and I heard that he's been having light meals in there. That's a lie. He's just avoiding me, she said inwardly. Ugh, Lucia shouted in pain, holding onto her head, her knife dropping to the floor. Madam? Jerome called, trying to offer his assistance. Ah, my head suddenly hurts. It's nothing serious. I'm used to it, she told him softly. Can you tell Anna to fetch my headache medicine? Lucia requested. Yes, madam, and I'll bring new utensils right away, Jerome tells her. About my meal. I'm quite full now. I should head upstairs, Lucia said, getting up from her seat. Jerome glanced at her. He observed her food. She had eaten only a small portion. Yes, madam, he tells her. In the hallway, Lucia walked calmly, her steps making quiet sounds. Her mind wandered back to her last encounter with Duke Hugo. I haven't thought about it. Because, as you said, that would be the end. There's nothing after the end. There's nothing, Duke Hugo told her softly. Do your conditions still stand? He questioned her. Yes, I made the promise first, so I won't break them, Lucia told him. A one-sided love that doesn't ask for anything in return. I don't ever want to fall in that kind of love, she said inwardly. Even if it starts out as self-contentment, one will eventually hope for a response. And a heart that yearns for someone who shows no reciprocation is bound to end up turning bitter. I didn't want to end up being engulfed by my own anger and resenting him, she thought. Later at night in her bedroom, Lucia's gaze was fixed at the door, as though she anticipated his coming. So he's not coming tonight either, she thought, still laying down on the bed. She remained calm, clutching onto herself. No matter how late he finished his work, he always used to quietly come in and hug me. It's only been a week since he stopped coming to bed, but it feels like it's already been 1,000 years, she thought, rising and sitting down on her bed. She slid her hands against the bed, feeling the sheets. He's just busy, that's all. From the outside, nothing is amiss, but a week could turn into a month and eventually develop into a year. Even if our marriage was an arrangement, no married couple thinks of each other as enemies from the beginning. Lucia pondered over, raising her head. Couples begin acting like strangers starting from one incident. From that point, it turns into a habit, she thought, fixing her gaze at the door once more. She remained calm, watching the door, her attention undivided. It's his fault. I was prepared to live in solitude for the rest of my life. He treated me with endless kindness, but after all this time, he's drawing the line with a sharp knife. That's why this feels so much like hell. That's why this is all his fault. All of it. All of it. All of it. All of it, she thought. Lucia went calm. Tears began building in her eyes gently. It's all my fault, she concluded, unable to hold back her tears. Why did I suddenly become greedy? I had given up on having a child from the very beginning. I married him so that I could have a peaceful and comfortable life. It was never my intention to win his affection. Until just a little while ago, everything was perfect, Lucia thought amidst her tears. Ugh, she screamed, sobbing, visibly trembling. I ruined it all, she said softly. It was raining heavily. Duke Hugo remained calm in his office, his eyes closed as he listened to the sound of the rain. 10 years. I suppose you should be around 18 years old, after 10 years. That's barely the age where he would be graduating from an academy. 10 years won't be enough, he thought, his back resting against his chair. He's not a fool, so he'll be useful after being taught for 4 to 5 years. At least 15 years, he thought, squeezing the chair's handle hard. I have to do this for 15 more years, he thought calmly. He paused his thinking for a moment. Darn it, when will this rain stop? He thought, holding his head. But that's the only time I can see her. Even after that day. She came out to work in the garden every day, he thought, fixing his gaze at the window, watching the raindrops trickling down. I'm pathetic. If I want to go see her, I should just do it. She's usually in the reception room around this time, the Duke thought, watching the rain. He pictured Lucia's face. He remained speechless, his demeanor turning sad. I've been avoiding her for days now. Then again, I started stealing glances at her while she was in the garden before even 2 days had passed, he thought, sulking at himself. You fool. It felt like 1,000 years had passed, but looking back on the time, it had only been a few days, he said inwardly, clenching his fist in anger. While I was avoiding her, I worked like a madman, and yet work took much longer than usual because I wasn't able to focus. I just wanted to prove myself. I wanted to prove that nobody could shake me. I wanted to show that my heart is mine and mine alone to control, he said inwardly, sitting down with a flop. I was so confident that it wouldn't be difficult, he said inwardly, getting back to work, continuing his writing. But the moment I saw her, I felt like everything was going to crumble. I am perfectly fine without her. I won't let a woman affect me, he told himself. I don't, he said inwardly, flashes of Lucia clouding his mind. I don't, he told himself once more, unable to remove her from his mind. He reminisced, hugging her tightly in his arms. That's impossible, he said loudly to himself, trying to concentrate on what he was writing. I will never admit it, he said inwardly. Your Excellency, someone called from outside his office, knocking lightly. That voice, he thought. Come in, Duke Hugo says to the person. He never comes in here empty-handed, he said inwardly. It was Duke Hugo's secretary. He kept a lot of paperwork on his desk. I knew it, even though I've been working all day, Duke Hugo thought, looking at the stacked papers with a flinch. His secretary tried sneaking out gently from the office. Hey, Duke Hugo calls him, prompting a jolting yes from him, halting his movement. When is that boy's vacation? Duke Hugo demanded. There's only one person whose vacation days would concern His Excellency. As far as I know, they don't have vacation there, his secretary Ashen tells him with a smile, but he was tensed. So he can't leave at all? The Duke asked, his tone sounding harsh. He's allowed to leave, Ashen tells him. Tell him to come, he tells Ashen, pushing the paperwork aside. Right now? But the semester just started. The academy must be notified at least a week before a leave of absence. Ashen replied him calmly, with a tensed smile. And since when have you been allowed to question my orders? Duke Hugo asked him, with a cold stare. I'll send a message right away, Ashen tells him, gulping hard in fear, still trembling. And send someone to the capital so Fabian can bring back the documents for the family registration, Duke Hugo tells him. Yes, Your Excellency, Ashen tells him, holding his hands behind his back. So he's going to register the young master as part of his family. It looks like the Duchess agreed to adopt him, Ashen thought, bowing to the Duke. I heard that they're very close and affectionate with one another. What would happen if the Duchess were to give birth to a boy? He wondered. That would be trouble. Obviously, the Duchess's son will have priority. But if His Excellency doesn't retract his announcement to appoint Damien as his heir, there will be a vicious struggle in the future over the succession to the dukedom, he thought. Damien Taran. He's an illegitimate child, but anyone who would dare to mention that in front of Duke Taran must surely have a death wish. Although everyone seems to be unsure, the announcement of the Duke's heir came as a shock to all. The only reason the scandal wasn't more widespread was because everyone was careful with their words. His Excellency sent his son to a boarding academy as soon as the boy turned 6. Back then, the reaction to his decision was shocking, Ashen thought, his mind going down memory lane, remembering the day. But Your Excellency, he is still too young. The academy should be considered in a year or 2. A man in the Duke's court begged. Too young? Duke Hugo asked, sounding uninterested at the man's plea. A 6-year-old should be able to survive something as harsh as being abandoned in the desert, Duke Hugo said with a cold look. Pardon? The man asked, the entire court shocked at the Duke's words. I would definitely have a higher chance of surviving at a boarding academy than in a desert. Thank you for your generous decision, Damien tells him calmly. Pardon? People shouted, looking astonished. He's going to send his 6-year-old son to a boarding school, and why is the boy thanking him for making a generous decision? The crowd asked, murmuring amongst themselves. They're both abnormal, Ashen thought. That's how they parted ways 2 years ago, and I thought that I wouldn't be seeing him until his graduation 10 or so years down the line, he said inwardly, reaching out to the door's handle. Suddenly someone knocked on the door. Your Excellency, it's Elliot, the person said loudly. You may enter, Duke Hugo tells him. Elliot stepped into the office, facing Ashen, who watched him flinching a bit. Elliot held a sealed letter in his hand. He gave it to the Duke. Duke Hugo read the letter silently, his eyes gently glancing through its contents. His facial expression soon seemed drawn into what he read, the further he read. Suddenly, his demeanor changed to a cheerful one. He wore a deadly smirk, his mood radiating evil.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible adventure. If you enjoyed what you watched, please consider liking, subscribing, and ringing that notification bell. Your comments mean the world to us and help us improve. The next episode promises even more excitement and unexpected twists, so stay tuned as we embark on this thrilling journey together. Keep the anticipation alive, and we'll catch you in the next episode.